I watched a good documentary series last night on YouTube, and I'll put a link to the videos on this video, presented by Laura Kuenssberg. It was about the situation in British politics between 2016 and 2022, of course, throughout that Brexit period, but also the fact that we rotated prime ministers every couple of years. Um, this country has had six prime ministers in less than a decade, which is quite something. Um, Usually in that sort of period, I think it would be no more than two or three in normal circumstances. So it says something as to where we are. Um, and it made me think it would be a good subject to talk about today, where we are with British politics right now. Now, I made a video a while back analysing the Labour government as I see it on the first year. Um, and this is going to partly cover that, but I'm also going to be talking about other parties. Now, before I get into that, just a quick word that I'm going to try and do a live stream later today. I'm going to have it around 4 o'clock. So if you happen to be around 4 o'clock today, the 15th of July, um, no, you know what? I'll make it 5 o'clock. This is why I don't tend to set times for live streams because I've just realized I had some other things to do. So 5 o'clock today, if you are around, do check out my live stream. It's an opportunity to engage. It's an opportunity to ask questions, to perhaps challenge me. Um, 5 o'clock today, I'll be doing a live stream, so please check that out. So, without further ado, this documentary I watched, presented by Laura Kuenssberg, it was I thought it was very good. It was balanced. There was interviews from all sides, not just Conservative but also Labour. And it just explored the way British politics was in that period. Pretty unstable. A lot of infighting, and Brexit just absolutely dominated everything in terms of the entire direction of how things were done. For me personally, and I don't want to rehash all Brexit arguments, but I do think that Theresa May especially had an impossible position because she'd become prime minister as someone who was known to vote Remain. She was never going to be trusted by dogmatic Brexiteers, and so I think they were determined to give her a hard time from the start. I do think that was the case. Steve Baker, who of course was an arch leaver, admitted that he was ashamed that they may have used the T word at times, meaning traitor. Um, so that just exemplifies how toxic that got. Interviewed Nadine Dorris. What I chiefly remember about her is she is Boris Johnson's chief sycophant. I mean, I would say Nadine Dorris is to Boris Johnson what Marjorie Taylor Greene is to Trump. Although I'd elevate Doris a little bit above Marjorie Taylor Greene, to be fair. She's not quite that toxic, but I do think this mentality that the Tories had, I remember it around 2022. Um, they went for trust because they wanted to punish Sunak for resigning from Johnson's government. Um, I think it's just outrageous that there was this, the Tories failed to introspect. It was this dogmatic support for one man. Now, in the documentary, Jacob Rees-Mogg says he felt it was very foolish to get rid of Boris Johnson when he'd had a mandate from the British people. What Rees-Mogg forgets is that mandate came in the general election of December 2019, before most of the sleaze had really transpired. So Rees-Mogg is ignoring the fact the British public was disgusted by that sleaze. And yes, Partygate was the tip of it, but there's other things going on as well. Um, and it was just the extreme arrogance of power. One rule for them, another rule for everyone else. Um, Looking back now, the arrogance, particularly of Dominic Cummings, his failure to directly apologise for his behaviour, was staggering, absolutely staggering. Um, there were many people, including our head of state at the time. The Queen had lost her husband. She had to essentially follow the rules like everyone else did. The government didn't. And I think the Tories have never fully grasped the anger on that. Um, When she became party leader, Kimmy Badenoch said, "We've made mistakes, but time to move on from Partygate." That says to me that she doesn't really grasp it. Now, of course, there'll be Tory members that don't care about that, but I think the wider public did. And it's not a question of beating an old horse. I do think this was something that got really into people's psyche. That there is an arrogance of power. It's one rule for them and another for everyone else. I don't think they've fully understood that. Johnson claimed that he did, but I think there was this mentality of, and they essentially confirmed this in the documentary of, well, Boris Johnson's just Boris Johnson. We'll let him away with things that other politicians wouldn't get away with. He's a rogue, but he's a lovable rogue, and it got to the point where it was parody. It was just no matter how many lies Johnson told, it was deemed to be okay because he's Boris Johnson. But the argument that Jacob Rees-Mogg made that the Tories had a mandate, which they did have in December 19, um, they squandered that with sleaze and corruption, and it was. I remember at the time being furious with that. So, although there's a lot of things about this Labour government I deeply dislike, and I feel that they have let down a lot of people who voted for them, I don't think it has the same level of sleaze. I really don't. We haven't had any huge scandals so far in the Labour government, not comparable to that Tory administration of, say, the early 2020s. It's just, I don't think it's comparable. Um, there's been a few resignations, there's been a few questionable things, but there's been nothing that has really shaken up the cabinet. There's been infighting, particularly over Israel and Gaza, but I don't think it's comparable to the way the Tories were in 2022. At least not yet. British politics, if anything, in recent years has been unpredictable. And like I said in the video where I was analysing Labour, we're in this strange situation where Labour has a very comfortable majority. They won a landslide in the last general election, one of the most decisive results ever. And yet they seem to be, they're not popular at the moment. Um, they look weaker now than Tony Blair's government did 1 year into its its administration. Blair's government in 1998 didn't look weak. Starmer's government in mid 2025, if not weak, it looks uncertain. It looks like a government that could actually be voted out. And that's an incredible thing when you consider they got a landslide. I think that the winter fuel thing, I think the hardline approach to welfare has polarized a lot of the people that vote for them. So it's astonishingly foolish. Um, and, I don't want people to think I'm overemphasizing this thing because I know for the average British voter it's not the number one priority. But I think if the Chinese mega embassy goes ahead, that would be astonishingly stupid. And it will be on the heads of Keir Starmer, Angela Rayner, and David Lammy if that goes ahead. And there is some sort of major security breach. Um, so British politics right now, I don't think we're in the situation we were in 2022. We're not going to have a general election anytime soon, and frankly, I don't think we should. I do not believe that there should be a general election every time governments have unpopular policies, because then nothing would get done. I don't believe that we should have a general election every year. That petition a while back to have a general election didn't really have a democratic mandate. It did not get as many signatures as Labour got votes. So it did not have a democratic mandate. And the guy who orchestrated that petition admitted that he was a Tory voter. He claimed that he was also disappointed with the Tories, but he was a publican who pretty much admitted that he was on the political right. And that's fine, that's legitimate, but that proves there is an agenda there, as opposed to just being someone who's disillusioned with Labour. That guy was never Labour. So um, that's why I did not sign that petition because I thought even though there was a lot of things I was frustrated about by Labour, I do not believe that there should be. I compare it to referendums. Referendums by nature are divisive, and I think whilst I wouldn't say that they should be held all the time, or they rather they should never be held, I don't think they should be held often because what Scotland and Brexit showed us is they're deeply divisive. They cause bitterness that doesn't go away overnight. The losing side will feel that their voice hasn't been heard. The winning side will feel that it can still be fragile. I mean, this is the thing, despite having got Brexit from Boris Johnson, um, ironically, Brexiteers are still whining, quite frankly. They're still complaining. My message to them is you got your way. How do you think the rest of us feel? You got what you want. We left the European Union. So take some responsibility, take ownership of it. And you can't even say it was not true Brexit because this was under Boris Johnson, not Theresa May. We left the European Union. So what happens now is our own destiny. I think they need to start taking some responsibility. It's just incredible that they're still complaining. Um, Farage claims that Johnson wasn't a true Brexiteer. Um, but there's going to be these arguments constantly. It's astonishing. It's just what I would call like this purist Brexiteer mindset, whereby Brexiteers fight among themselves to see who could be. It's almost like I don't want to compare it to the French Revolution because obviously it's not violent, but it's a bit like, well, you had French revolutionaries turning on themselves because they weren't revolutionary enough, or Chinese Red Guards doing that. I cannot think in modern times of anyone so dogmatic as hardline Brexiteers, where they are constantly looking over their back and saying, "Is this true Brexit? Are they pure? Are they a true Brexiteer?" It actually creates a very toxic environment, I think. Um, I mean, May tried her best. She brought in a cabinet that was 50-50. In fact, she brought in many leaders to her cabinet to show that she wouldn't push a pro Remain agenda. That wasn't good enough. They went out of their way to sabotage her from the start, to undermine her premiership, which I think was disgraceful. Um, and then what happened with Liz Truss? She surrounded herself by absolute loyalists, and then she lasted 49 days. So it just shows how toxic politics was at that time and how toxic the Tory infighting was at that time. By the way, I should clarify my line on Brexiteers is not a swipe at everyone who voted Brexit. I'm talking about people who are still constantly complaining about it, even though they voted to leave. My point there is, you voted for it. Take some responsibility. I'm not talking about people who vote for Brexit because they genuinely believed it was the right thing and they just want to get on with things and they're not. I just think complaining for something that you voted for is a bit hypocritical. Um, because the rest of us were told, oh, you're engaging in Project Fear. Well, no, I have no responsibility for Brexit. If you vote for it, you do. That's how I see it. Um, and, of course, Farage's line is it wasn't true Brexit. They weren't true Brexiteers. Um, but anyway, I derail. When I look at the spectrum right now, if there was a general election tomorrow, I genuinely would struggle to know who to vote for. But that does not mean I'm apathetic. The last thing I am is apathetic. I think sometimes there's a misconception that if people are undecided about who to vote for, they're not interested in politics. If anything, pe- people who are more conscientious could have a struggle because with someone like myself, I identify with the political centre. You might think the Liberal Democrats are my natural choice. Probably I would vote for them. But I'm not fully on board with some of the things they come out with. They're too woke for my liking. I don't like a lot of and I do not like the sort of gender politics that the Liberal Democrats especially been pushing, on, for example, the trans issue. I don't agree with that. I also feel the Liberal Democrats have failed to speak up on issues they should be absolutely outspoken on. For example, the use of non-crime police incidents. The Liberal Democrats, as a Liberal Party, should be at the absolute forefront, screaming at the top of their lungs, this is wrong. They should be absolutely forcefully defending free speech. And so far, they haven't really done so, not in a prominent way, not as much as they should. Um, the Liberal Democrats should be absolutely supporting the Conservatives in pledging an end to non-crime hate incidents because those are overused. Police use resources on them when they should be using it to fight crime that really impacts lives. So I I'm going to when I get a chance contact the Liberal Democrats on this. I guess it would be the Home Affairs spokesperson and challenge them. Why have you not been more outspoken about this? Why are you not condemning the police abuse of power on these issues? That is a Liberal issue. That's something they should be talking about. Um, so I agree with the Liberal Democrats on a lot of things. I agree with them on Donald Trump. I agree with them on Ukraine. I agree with them on broadly speaking, centrist issues, but I do think they can be more outspoken on things like that. Crime, I don't trust the Liberal Democrats, and that is one of the major things I care about. So you might think, when I look around at the party spectrum, Conservatives should be the natural party of that, the party of law and order, but frankly, they've done far, far too little in their 14 years in power. There was a few minor improvements, televised verdicts, victims getting more say in parole hearings, but there were mild improvements. It wasn't enough. Um, Sentencing continued to be far too lenient, even if there was a slight increase from 10 years before. Saying a slight increase is just not good enough when most people are disillusioned by the justice system. So I actually feel, I've said this before, politicians are good at being populist on this issue. Most of them talk tough, but when it comes to it, it's the system itself. Unless the sentencing council is pressured to be more, to be tougher on crime, unless judges are held to more scrutiny, unless the system itself is held up with a massive magnifying glass, politicians, in a way, they're the fall guys. People don't realize this. Politicians set legislation, but they actually cannot necessarily determine the length of sentences. That comes down to the sentencing council and judges. And if politicians were to do that, if they were to start talking about sentences, they would be accused of interfering with the judiciary. So the general public need to understand politicians can't actually do everything. And any politician that talks tough on crime needs to be honest about that. They need to be honest about the fact that they have limitations. Um, so I think there needs to be more of scrutiny and pressure put on the sentencing council and on individual judges, quite frankly. I'm not saying they have an easy job. I'm not saying that. But there is definitely a disconnect from the public and the criminal justice establishment, without question. When you get a teenager who's paralyzed a woman and he gets just 2 years because of dangerous driving, that is a disconnect. When you get teenage killers getting less than 10 years in jail, that's a disconnect. When you get career criminals getting, appearing before a judge time after time after time and still being spared a custodial sentence, that shows a disconnect. Um, so I think that I think that's something that goes beyond party politics. I hate to say it, but looking at all the parties, probably reform would be the most hard line. So you might think, okay, well, I would naturally vote reform for that reason because I care so strongly about law and order. It's the sort of thing whereby if it was a single bill and it meant like supporting reform for a single bill, I would probably do it. Um, Reform was talking about a national inquiry into the grooming gangs before Starmer turned the tables on that. He only done it from public pressure. Uh, so you might think, okay, I'd vote reform. But that is the only reason I would vote reform. Now, it happens to be a big issue. I do care about it deeply. But I also care about foreign policy, and I do not trust reform when it comes to foreign policy. I absolutely do not trust reform on foreign policy. Um, the fact that they constantly want belligerence with our European neighbours, and yet you have a leader in Nigel Farage who, in my view, is a complete Trump sycophant. I mean, it's really a pathetic level of pandering that he does. He's admitted that they're close friends. Sometimes in politics that's beneficial, but I think when it comes to Donald Trump, it's the wrong thing because it would suggest that Farage would sell this country for Donald Trump. I believe he would absolutely go out of his way to please Donald Trump. I do not trust that. I absolutely do not trust reform when it comes to Russia. And I know they bristle at this and they claim it was taken out of context and all the rest of it. Nigel Farage was given an opportunity to clarify this. He very clearly said, I admire some of Putin's skills as a leader. I abhor what he's done. He followed it up with that. but he clearly said that he admired Putin. My point would be, why say that at all? Why even say that at a time when you have a European country that is under constant assault, that's been invaded, a sovereign nation, when you have Russian nationals threatening nuclear war against this country? Why would you even say something like that? It's not good enough to follow up by saying, oh, I disagree with what Putin's done, I abhor what he's done. Not good enough, Farage. That's what you said. It's not a smear to say that. That is what he said. Um, And even more despicable is the fact that Farage was repeating Russian propaganda, essentially blaming NATO for the invasion of Ukraine. This ironically puts Nigel Farage in the same camp as Jeremy Corbyn and the far left. It's something curiously that the hard right and the far left seem to have in common, their curious tendency to defend Putin's regime and to blame anyone but Putin for Putin's decisions. I am sick and tired of this false narrative that Russia was surrounded by NATO. In fact, I even saw a meme, obviously this is being sarcastic, but suggesting that Vladimir Putin is actually a CIA sleeper agent. This was sarcastic, but the point is he has managed to strengthen the resolve of the West, increase the size of NATO, strengthen Ukraine's resolve. Maybe he's a CIA sleeper agent. Um, that's the great irony of it. Rather than weakening NATO, Putin has actually strengthened NATO by his aggressive tactics. So for Farage to repeat the narrative that NATO provoked Putin, I think, is an absolute disgrace. Russia was a member of the G8. It was kicked out for good reason. Um, this is not about being surrounded by NATO. This is about Putin's irredentive obsessions. It's about Putin feeling um, this sense of vengeance, this sense of humiliation from not even the collapse of the Soviet Union, the collapse of the Tsarist Empire. That is the understanding of, often Putin's cheerleaders say we need to understand the Russian point of view. I don't think it's actually rocket science. I think Russia um, feels that it needs to make up its lost empire. It's aggressive, irredentist um, warmongering. That's essentially what it is. I don't think it's much more complicated than that. And they say NATO as the enemy because NATO naturally is going to react to this. Um, when you have Russian nationals threatening nuclear war against the West, that is not a regime we can trust or work with. So I do not trust reform on this. I absolutely do not trust reform. If they got into power, would they continue funding Ukraine? I'm not sure that they would. And they might think one reform spokesperson described this as a regional Slavic war. That is the breadth of Ukraine's worldview. I think it's pathetic. That sort of attitude emboldens Putin. And if they really want to say this is about, just about Ukraine, it's not, because Russia has proven it's a direct threat to this country. Russia poisoned Skripals on British soil, which led to the death of a British civilian. Russia is a threat to this country. And for a party that claims to be all about patriotism, reform should be on the forefront of opposing Russia. They're not. So I do not trust reform when it comes to foreign policy. And it is a major thing for me. Yes, crime is also a major thing, but reform talk tough. But again, they'll have limits unless the sentencing council changes, unless the legal establishment as a whole changes. Then we're going to continue to be disappointed. I'm going to wrap this up soon. I haven't said much about the Tories, but frankly, I think they're unelectable. I don't believe that Badenoch has been a very strong leader. She has resorted to a lot of cheap shots. Recently that whole line about the Prime Minister not having um, balls, to put it bluntly. It's just it's good for a bit of attention grabbing, but I think Badenoch actually lacks much substance. And ironically, when she wasn't leader, she was on something. She did talk about things that a lot of people do care about. She pointed out the importance of defending women. Um, I support Kimmy Badenoch, and I still do, when she got into that feud with David Tennant. Um, but to be a strong leader, you need to be a bit more than just on the right side of the culture wars. You need to show that you're capable of actually leading. You need to show you're capable of introspection. I don't believe she has really shown that the Tories are ready to govern again. She hasn't sufficiently addressed why they lost power in the first place. Now, to the likes of Nadine Dorris, the Tories lost power because they betrayed Boris Johnson. I would say it was Boris Johnson that was one of their biggest Achilles heels. If they put Johnson back into power, it may get a few reform votes, but the rest of the public absolutely do not want to see that. They do not want to see a personality cult. Um, so, in a way, the way British politics is right now, I want the dust to settle. I don't think we should have a general election anytime soon. Labour does risk losing the next general election. I think they should have a wealth tax because if they are continue to be seen to be hammering the poorest and the most vulnerable, like disabled claimants, pensioners, it's going to really backfire on them. Um, I wouldn't put too much weight into Corbyn's talk about forming a new party. Um, there is definitely a faction for that. There's definitely a hard left faction who are furious with the government over Israel and the Palestinians. I would point out this government has been more hardline on Israel than any of its predecessors. Now, could they go further? Could they complete the halt funding to Israel? They could. But if you look at the sort of language that Starmer and Lamy have used recently, they've definitely toughened their stance. That's a positive thing. Um, but it may again be too little too late. So much of Keir Starmer's premiership has been responding to things after they happen rather than being on top of the game. Um, so he could have the situation of being a prime minister who inherited a very comfortable majority, but then squandering it not by sleaze, but by being out of touch. I do think in some ways Starmer is out of touch on many big issues. Now he spoke about the antisocial behaviour problem, but then Labour has mixed messages on that. I think if they build more prisons, that would be a good thing. It will ease overcrowding, which means easing pressure on prison staff and inmates alike. But they have to do it. Words are cheap. They have to be seen to be doing that. And Yvette Cooper needs to be more outspoken on the issue of non-crime police incident. She needs to. I think Labour can get ahead of the board by abolishing that altogether because this thing of two-tier care is going to stick. And they can say it's just a right-wing smear, but a lot of people think there is actually some ground to that. They do see double standards in justice. I see double standards in justice. So Labour needs to get on top of that, not dismiss it as some sort of far right smear like they've been trying to do so far. They need to get on top of that and say, look, no one should get six uniformed officers going to their house for having a Twitter feud with their school online. That is a disgrace. But this isn't just politicians. Police forces need to come under pressure. Police chiefs who get their officers to do this, frankly, should be pressured to resign. I think it is a disgraceful abuse of power. I think those are resources that could be better spent on fighting crime. So pressure also needs to be put on the police to not engage in this sort of thing. Um, so my feeling right now is I'm not overly enthusiastic about any political party, but I haven't mentioned the SNP because it's a nationalist party. They want Scottish independence. They're in a mess right now because of their own internal struggles. As for the Greens, I don't take them seriously. There is a certain niche for that. If you're a young person who cares about the environment and you're of a left wing persuasion, you may well vote Green if you're disillusioned with Labour and the Liberal Democrats. Um, for the rest of us, I can never vote for a party that officially endorsed Just Stop Oil. I think the Greens are a professional protest party. I don't think they want to be in government. I think if they were in government, they wouldn't know how to handle it. They'd think, "Oh, why are we not? Why are we not in the streets protesting? Why are we not?" I just don't think they're fit for government. I don't take them seriously. I absolutely don't trust them on issues like crime. Um, that's why I haven't really mentioned the Greens. I'll admit that they've done quite well in recent years, but I don't. I don't think that the. I mean, actually, if Corbyn forms a new party, that could actually divide the left. It could divide the Greens and the Liberal Democrats. But we'll see. In conclusion, if a party like the Liberal Democrats, who I agree with in many areas, took a very hard line on crime, I'd vote for them tomorrow. And also took more of an assertive stance on issues like free speech. That would be my perfect party. My perfect party doesn't exist. Um, I want to be enthusiastic about Labour because I think it takes time for any government to bring in changes when their predecessors have been in power for 14 years. But Labour has made a few serious mistakes so far. I think they are, dismissing the two-tier thing as right-wing propaganda is wrong because there is a very real public perception that it's happening. They need to get on top of it. Um, Rachel Reeves and Liz Kendall hammering claimants is a serious mistake. It's going to, I think they think that they need to pander to reform, and there may be some of that going on. But they shouldn't lose to the left in the process, and I don't think reform is even that big on hammering disabled claimants. Um, I think for them it's more issues about the small boats and about freedom of speech. So Labour needs to get on top of these things. Um, our next general election probably won't be until 2028. That's a long time in politics, anything can happen. Um, I'm not overly enthusiastic about British politics right now. We should remember, though, and I'll wrap it up with this. This has been a longer video. Um, British politics it can be messy at times. People can be disillusioned, feel let down. But what we don't have is constant military coups. We don't have significant violence in our politics. We can sometimes take this for granted. If you look around the world, we can complain about our politics, but there's many parts of the world that is in a far, far, far worse situation than this. There's parts of the world where brawls break out in Parliament. I mean, really, in the overall picture, British politics isn't too bad. I think the dust should settle. I think Labour should be given a chance. They have made some serious mistakes, and if they keep doing this, I certainly won't be voting Labour next time around. But I don't agree with having a general election every time government have unpopular policies. Um, in that case, there needs to be peaceful protests and pressure on those governments to reverse those policies to get in touch. And if they don't, vote them out of office. But we need to have some stability. Um, that's how I see it. If there was a general election tomorrow, I would probably vote Liberal Democrat, but there are a few things I'd like to be them to be a lot more outspoken on the issue of free speech and police use of non-crime hate incidents. I really would like to see the Liberal Democrats be more outspoken in that because so far they haven't been. And also the threat of Islamist extremism. I want to see the Liberal Democrats speak about that. They're far too politically correct by half. I'm not happy about that. Let me know your thoughts about British politics right now. Thanks for watching.